Welcome on a Wednesday night to Generation Movies. Although, truth be told, this will be
Oh,
our first. Yeah, we're going to get this out of the way early. This will be
okay.
our very first taped episode of Generation Movies, our Generation Movie, because Rich has a big, fancy schmancy Hollywood premiere kind of screening to go to this Wednesday. So we have to accommodate because I want Rich to succeed at everything he does.
Thank you.
So that's what we're in this for, to work together. Anyway, we're taping. So if you make comments, great. We will try to get to them and try to respond, but we're not going to be
Next.
live. It'll be Memorex, and we'll talk about some of the comments that we see on the broadcast for next week when we do next week's show. Couple things. Let's get them out of the way before Rich calls me on them, because before I get called on stuff. Um, my name is J.W. Caldwell. I'm joined by Rich Dries. He's amazing. He's a film critic for the Philadelphia Film Critic Association, Society, something. I don't know. It's important.
Philadelphia Film Critics. I am a member of the Philadelphia Film Critics Circle, but I am
Circle.
a film critic for Film
I knew
Buff
it was
Online.
something. I knew it was like Society or Circle or
Yeah,
some sort of fancy schmancy like secret society thing. Um,
we got the
but
handshake thing.
oh, that's cool. It's like it does it. A wise guy, certainly. But anyway, if you like this show, if you like other shows on our network, which are all great, we have a wonderfully talented cast of characters on this network. The Indescape Network has its own YouTube channel. We also have our own Facebook page, Indie Escape Network Facebook page. Really, a lot of stuff going on. A lot of great guys. We have CJ, we have Gabe, we have Brandon. We have David Madison on Sunday nights with Joe Ridgely doing the end of the night, with Scott Schiaffo joining most of the time. So a wonderful array of people and many places where you can get our network. So, Rich, how's your week going? I know it's early in the week, but how's your week going?
It is kind of crazy busy. Catching up on a few things for, as you said, as a member of the Philadelphia Film Critics Circle,
Circle.
we have our Best of the Year voting coming up. Basically, they have to give us everything to look at by December 1st, which is
So
this
you're
Thursday.
just knee deep in
I'm
screeners
needing
and
screeners, links, all sorts of stuff right now, trying to, and everybody in our group is like talking back and forth about what they like, what they didn't like. And suddenly I'll be like, okay, I think I've narrowed it down to like the 4 things I still have to watch. And then somebody will mention 3 things. And I was like, well, I better put those on the list now because those sound good too. So now back to 7.
that seems
And,
very exciting.
it is.
Um,
It is.
I, well, and so I
It's
think one of the
not to let
stories.
it be overwhelming, but yeah.
Yeah, well, no, but I think one of the biggest stories of the weekend that we're coming out of is box office was interesting.
Ooh.
Strange World bombs badly.
Well,
Weirdest opening
happens
for
when you don't
a
advertise your movie.
well, maybe advertise your movie a little bit better than what they advertised it. And if you're gonna do a here's the thing. I understand this whole thing. There's a lot of people going and go woke, go broke, stupidity. What I would say is for Disney, if you're gonna make a movie that is this inclusive, by all means advertise it that way,
Mm-hmm.
right? A biracial family. One of the protagonists is gay. By all means, don't step back from it. Step into it as
Yeah.
opposed to waiting on because the inclusion is kind of like welcome. There are a lot of biracial families in this country that may have wanted to go see this movie and enjoy it.
If they
Um,
knew it existed.
if they knew it existed. I also think it's kind of funny. It's very much in the mind frame for me with Disney with regards to Atlantis, right? The Lost Continent. I think it's going to be one of those movies that people will find after the fact and they will
Mm-hmm.
end up loving it and we'll talk about it more as it progresses through. Also, Disney has done a big disservice to their animated movies because Disney Plus is right there and people know that if they wait a month they might get to see it for free. So we've weakened the places where theaters were important, and now Disney is kind of living that dream. Now the other side of this is a wildly successful opening for a movie that's only playing till tomorrow night. We're filming on Monday, playing till tomorrow night, and no chance for this. Also, no advertising, but also no chance for the streamer to go, well, we can extend it out, because basically what has happened is they said, just give us these screens, these 600 to 800 screens for a week. And all the chains have kind of jumped in and said, okay, because they knew what the product was. Movie ends up grossing $13 million over a 3-day span. All of a sudden, it's going to end up grossing anywhere from 13 to 20, depending on where you're looking at it, right? And I'm talking about Glass Onion, which is a Knives Out mystery. It is a phenomenal film. It needs to be seen with a lot of folks.
Oh,
It
gotcha.
needs to be seen on a big screen. Now, that's not wrong for Netflix, but I think we might be looking at a weird place where Netflix has to change how they're doing things, and Disney has to change how they're doing things. So you have Disney Plus and Netflix are the two biggest streamers going. I think the interesting storyline here is that Netflix is, if they're going to put their money into these big event movies, they're going to have to give them a theatrical release, and they're going to have to negotiate with some of the studios. They're going to have to negotiate with the theater chains and get at least a 3 or 4 week opening for these movies. They're too expensive not to, and it makes no sense not to.
Yeah.
Disney, on the other hand, is going to have to look at it and go, we can't give our stuff away so early on Disney Plus, because we've now trained the consumer to immediately shift. It is a weird place to be, and I think it's one of the coolest things going. Also, the idea that Netflix is going to have to change is cool for me, because we're all about change, right?
Yeah. Netflix wants to be a disruptor. At the same time, it wants to figure out a way to, make a profit. And the way they're disrupting things, the way they want to disrupt things, isn't necessarily profitable in the way that they think it should be. They need the theatrical model to help sustain
Paying $200 million a movie.
Yeah.
Yes, you need a theatrical model of some sort. And I just think it's really interesting that, like, they overpaid for Glass Onion, they overpaid for the Knives Out movies, but it is going to be number one the moment it hits Netflix.
Oh yeah,
and everybody's going to be watching it over the Christmas break. But
meanwhile, Disney dropped 180 million to produce
Strange World.
Strange World, and they had no confidence. It looked like they had no confidence in it whatsoever. And I think that was, if this is like just kind of like a bit of a hangover from the Bob Chapek era, where he was all about the streaming. He was all about Disney Plus, and he was kind of trying to push all their chips onto that bet. And it's not a good bet. You still need theatrical, because that's still going to generate.
And I've never understood the bet on all streaming, because even just the theatrical leads into the Blu-ray like I envision with this particular opening and with Iger back, right? We haven't talked about that, but Iger coming back, I envision that they're going to fix this model a little bit for both Disney and for Netflix. Netflix is a whole new world. But if you're in a world where you're paying $200 million for a Rock, Gal Gadot,
Ryan Reynolds
flick, by all means, open it on 2,000 screens and see how it does. And even if it doesn't do well, it doesn't do great, you can at least then go, well, it had we put it up on the big screen so people had a chance to see it on the big screen. You come across as moderately trying to save the film world, right? And theaters would appreciate you a little bit more. Maybe they open it up, but I in fact envisioned a world today where Netflix goes, oh, but it's going to stay for a couple more weeks, because it's not dropping on Netflix till December 23rd.
If Netflix,
they're leaving money on the table.
If Netflix had opened up Glass Onion on 2,000 screens instead of like 690, whatever it was, they could have easily cleared anywhere between 35 to 40 million just for the opening weekend, I think, if not more. And
it's dumb. It's leaving money on the table. I think it's the weekend.
All the way into the holidays, into the Christmas weekend, I guarantee it. This movie could have done another 200 million for them.
Yeah,
and
and I
they
just
walked away from that because I don't
it's the
see.
week it's the week Disney fucked up and is going to learn a new way, and the week Netflix fucked up and is going to learn a new way, all in the
Let's
same
hope.
Thanksgiving weekend, right?
Let's hope they learn from these
Um,
horrible mistakes.
but our movie tonight is about learning from things too, right? Our movie,
Yeah,
the movie we're going to discuss tonight. Perfect
great
segue
segue.
there. I love when I get a segue. Yeah, Chef's Kiss, baby, woo. Okay, so here's the thing: some of the times we do movies, it's not cult films or not super popular movies, but sometimes we do movies that are important and they need to be talked about because in the realm of 40 years being 40 years on this planet, movies transcend the time, and you may not have seen it, and you may go, "Hey, I'm a big fan of that actor. Why haven't I seen this?" And then I'm going to tell you, in this particular case, you should. The movie is The Verdict
Mm-hmm.
tonight that we're doing. It is a Paul Newman movie that also happens to have a great supporting cast of James Mason, Jack Warden, Charlotte Rampling, and Miles O'Shea as the biggest scumbag judge I've ever seen. But anyway, we'll get to it.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but it is such a great. Um, it's a Sidney Lumet film. It's this great courtroom drama about a guy who's lived his life precipitously in a bottle. So it has all the makings of an alcoholic film. Plus, it all has all the makings of an interesting courtroom drama. So you have like two things going on, and it's a lot of it's not fun, but it's crisp and effective, and it's just it makes you think about everything that you're thinking about with regards to somebody crippled by alcoholism that loses the piece of their life and maybe finds one shining example where they can get their life back. But we'll
Mm-hmm.
start where we always start. Production is a place like, and this movie, the production story on this one, right? Every week I come up with what the story is. The story here is the amount of talent that was involved before anybody made a movie. So you have people fighting over this movie, fighting over various pieces of this movie. And Richard Zanuck and David Brown, kind of famous producers, they buy a book, right? They buy this book that's kind of like, it's a major book. It's Barry Reed. It's a 1980 novel. They start working on the adaptation. Great. Um, Actors attached. You have Roy Scheider, William Holden, who's still alive at this point, Frank Sinatra, Cary Grant, and Dustin Hoffman, right? And then Arthur Hiller was originally attached to direct. And then they hire this young playwright, this guy that may have a way with words, where this young playwright who's just starting out, and he only has one movie under his belt, and his name is David Mamet.
Some young punk.
Some young punk who's writing these screenplays for all these major people, has one
Mm-hmm.
screenplay under his belt, and comes in and does an amazing redraft and makes this amazing script that everybody is attached to, right? Um, but at this point, he's not David Mamet that we know. He's not Glenn Ross David Mamet. He's just some guy that gets the job,
He's still
and
making his bill.
he's still learning how to do things. And one of the things, would you agree that when you watch this movie and you're listening to the dialogue and you're listening to the monologues and the crispness, like this resembles Mamet more than almost any other movie that isn't Mamet. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
it's got cadence to it. It's got the script is really dense.
Mm-hmm.
It's dark, but it's also humorous. It
And another thing that really works in Mamet's favor is, and it lets the actors loose too, is it's where he doesn't say things, where the characters don't say things. That
quiet
also,
moments.
yeah, there are moments where they just don't say a certain thing. They don't be obvious about it, and it lets the actor really emote, do and do things, and that I think elevates this material from what could have been a very common courtroom potboiler.
Yeah, very, yes, I would agree with that. But also, so I also love that some of the stories that go into production, Mamet's first script doesn't have the ending that the film does. Mamet's, even though the book is called The Verdict and the movie is called The Verdict, in Mamet's original draft of the script he delivered, it ends with Frank's courtroom sequence, and then you never hear how the case ends. And so the first time he meets with Zanuck and Brown, who, by the way, at this point deal with young punks, right? They've already dealt with Spielberg. They've like, it's their gig. Zanuck and Brown come into the meeting and basically are sarcastic with him. They're like, "Hey, I didn't get my last page of the script," and so there's a whole story about them coming in, and Mamet not necessarily fighting about it, but just I like the script the way where it ends, and at that point Hiller jumps off. Hiller jumps off the production, says, "I don't know that I like the script. I like the book, but." Hiller basically says the script is maybe should have a question mark after it, which because the way it ends with no thing, and that point all these people who were attached jump off because Hoffman was interested in Hiller, and to a certain extent Roy Scheider and Cary Grant were also interested in Hiller, but they jump off.
That's where building a package like that of actors and directors and stuff like that, it's always a house of cards. And if one person leaves, the whole thing can just collapse in on itself, and the producers or the studio are left to try to rebuild that again. And every now and then you'll hear about a project being announced as a so-and-so's attached with director blah blah blah, and then it never happens. And it's usually because of stuff like this where there's some issues.
One piece, one thing could knock the whole thing down.
Yeah.
One thing. And so you're right. So all these people jump off, but then somebody interesting jumps in, and especially with the person that we're dealing with, Robert Redford jumps onto the screenplay. But he comes in, and his problem with the script isn't that it doesn't have an ending, or that we don't know what happens to the case. His problem with the script is he doesn't necessarily want the lawyer to be a drunken womanizer the way the script portrays him. And so Redford comes in and sands off the edges of the script and says, "Hey, I can do it, but it's got to be more enlightened. It's got to be like a better version of this character." And then he goes and has a meeting with Sidney Pollack, unbeknownst to Richard Zanuck and David Brown, and he gets fired. So he gets fired from the production because he was taking meetings with directors without the producers. Redford was doing Redford things when he wasn't in charge, which I found fascinating. So that happens. Then Sidney
Pollack would have been a good choice for this because I think he shares along with Sidney Lumet, not just a first name, but the idea there's
spelled, by the way. Just so we're clear.
I know differently spelled.
Differently spelled. Well, just for the audience. That's for the audience, not necessarily for you. I know you. Sidney differently spelled.
But I think both of their works have strong through lines of morality, and the characters are always striving to do the right thing, the moral thing, and in a very amoral world. And
I think Pollack would have been great. I think Lumet works. I think Lumet works a little bit better only because Lumet has court movies on his docket, so to speak.
12 Angry Men. What else? What else do you need?
But it's the kind of thing where you look up and you go, Zanuck and Brown then decide to hire Sidney Lumet. They send him all the versions of the script they have. At this point, there's 3 different versions of the script. There's a J. Preston Allen version of the screenplay that again sanitizes a little bit of the character. There's a version that's by writer director James Bridges that Robert Redford had brought on. So a little bit of changes, but Lumet goes in and says, I particularly like how gritty and fast and moving the Mamet script is, except for the ending, right? They then agree that Paul Newman is the guy to go to. Paul Newman, they basically, once he brings Paul Newman in, they only had to rework one or two scenes and fix the ending, right? So that the verdict actually has a verdict at the end of it, which is so, by the way, just so we're clear, that's so fucking Mamet to have something called the verdict and to not have the actual verdict in the fucking screenplay. That's very David Mamet. Like I appreciate it so much.
I'll be honest. The first time I watched it, I mean, this movie is not far enough into the Reagan era of America that it was going to be happy, positive ending. And the first time I watched it, I was thinking to myself, he could lose this case. And that would be an interesting choice. And if
it would be an interesting choice, but I think the funny thing about losing we'll talk about when we get there, but the thing about losing the case is really interesting because there's so many places where the plaintiff's side in this case, it's one of the things a little boggly about the screenplay. There's so many things on the plaintiff's side where there would be appeals that would go on for ages.
Oh God,
there's a judge sequence in this movie that is the most not egregious. I've never actually seen a judge do it. Like even in recent times, I don't remember a judge doing what the judge does in this movie, and it's shocking when it happens, and then it continues to happen, and you're just like, what is going on?
Where the judge asks question of the
I think I can ask a question in my own courtroom. It's like, but if you're gonna ruin my case, I prefer, if you're gonna lose my case for me, I prefer you to lose, like, to win it. I think is what Newman says. Like, you can ask questions, great, but don't lose my case for me. I can lose it all on my own. But so they finish. They basically work on everything. They then Lumet is able to. Well, yeah, but
in Boston do a lot of location work in Boston.
Paul Newman almost gets killed in Boston.
Oh yeah.
There's a story going around that basically they were filming one day, and after a rainstorm, the lighting rig got loose and almost fell and killed Paul Newman on this movie, which is an interesting portion of the production. Lumet also snags Jack Warden, who is fantastic in this movie, and then he also snags, and it's his last role on Earth, James Mason, who is a fantastic British actor, and he is, as Jack Warden goes, that guy's the Prince of fucking Darkness. And it's just one of the great lines. And then you see him, and he's just this nebbish little man. But every time he speaks, somebody's getting thrown under a bus somewhere. Every single time he speaks, he's doing something so horrific, either from a racial standpoint, or from a law standpoint, or from just every time he talks. But
Mason has I would say Mason has a long history of playing sons of bitches.
Well, I was watching this on Turner Classic Movies, which, by the way, you can still watch it on this month. And they're doing James Mason month. And then I found out that he was also in another movie with Paul Newman called The Macintosh Man, which I had never heard of. But immediately after watching this and then realizing that they have another movie together, I immediately recorded it on my DVR, and I am going to watch it. I'm on a Paul Newman kick anyway. I've been on a Paul Newman kick since Ethan Hawke documentary over the summer, The Last Movie Stars. I've been on a Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward kick like you would not believe. So anytime there's something new that comes in my wheelhouse that's anything Paul Newman, I feel like I've been watching the guy progress as we're watching all these movies. He was one of the best we've ever had.
But I just want to, call out some of Mason's SOB roles. Let's starting with Hitchcock's best film, in my opinion, North by Northwest.
That relationship is never justified. We don't know what's going on with him and Martin Landau. I think we do, but I also don't think in the 60s we were allowed to.
No, we weren't. But yeah, you got Lolita in there. Of course, he played Captain Nemo in Disney's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. so many good roles, and so many times he was such a presence, a very menacing presence that I think for the moviegoers at the time, if they were familiar with that body of work, that brought a lot of extra baggage to what he was, to what people were seeing him do. I think, and I think
Right,
that helped.
he's so sweet in the movie though. Like
Yeah.
he's a
Oh.
very he's very nebbish in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it comes off on the written page, I can't like, you know, when Jack Warden calls him Prince of Darkness, and he walks in, he's wearing tweed, and he has a you know,
Bow
little
tie.
bow tie, and you're just like, oh, maybe he is the Prince of Darkness. Um, but the Lumet there getting both of them, um, is an amazing get because Jack Warden is really good in the movie too. He plays kind of like the right hand investigator type that you see in all of these lawyer movies. It's a tried and true, the guy that supports the lawyer with all the stuff that we can't talk about, that we need to get, that we have to have for the trial
Mm-hmm.
guy. And it's a really great supporting role. He gets all the cursing in the movie. Every
And
curse in this
Warden
movie is Jack Warden, and he
and Warden
delivers the
always
F word
plays,
amazingly.
and Warden always plays like high energy guys too. Think of, yeah, in another great law courtroom movie that Jack Warden is in, and Justice for All. He's bananas in that movie.
Yeah, he's great, and that's the thing. Like, there's
And
an energy to him.
here
Here
he's
he's
so
tired.
tamped down. And I like that about him. He's like very calm, he's cool, he's
Well, no,
fatherly.
he's fatherly, but it's also like it's the Frank Galvin character is also like he's the kind of person that has his wife is in a vortex of chaos and alcohol, and he grabs other people and drags them into the vortex. And there's a weariness to the Jack Warden character and role that is just beautiful. Like, in the sense, like, Frank, this is it. This is my last case for you. I can't do any more. I brought you this great case. You haven't talked to them in the guy's waited for 3 months to talk to you. They got a
Mm-hmm.
letter saying the court case is next week. What are you doing? You know, like, he's just so weary. Um,
I think this might be one of his best roles,
I,
honestly.
I wholeheartedly agree. He's great. He's great to side to in the helping of Paul Newman and trying to get this character over the line. It's really, and he keeps him up. He buys him cigarettes. He buys him booze. Brings him food. You know what I mean? Like, it's a really cool performance.
Mm-hmm.
And so is Mason's. Mason's is really good. Now,
All around.
one of the things everybody across the board is really good. I don't want to. Anybody in this
Yeah.
movie is really good. Everybody that shows up and has scenes and talks are really good in the movie.
Everybody's
Um,
firing on all cylinders.
and then one of the other things I do want to talk about during production that happened, where Paul Newman it was one of the more appreciative times in his life. So the legend of Paul Newman, and Paul Newman being this major star, this major actor, this guy that got a lot of things done, made a lot of movies, had a lot of starring roles. Sidney Lumet, at the time when he's doing productions and making movies, he does full dress rehearsals, extensive dress rehearsals that are not the norm in Hollywood at the
No.
time. And to be honest, they're really not the norm at any time in Hollywood. Dress rehearsals are more, you know, if you have a dress rehearsal, it's like, just shoot the goddamn movie, right? I mean, but one of the things that comes across in the stories about the production is that it took the dress rehearsals, and it took the time that Newman was living in the skin, and also during the dress rehearsals, where basically Lumet would go to Newman and say, "I think you're phoning this in. I don't think," and basically saying, "I need you. I don't need Paul Newman movie star. I need Paul Newman." And I guess Lumet at the time knew he was an alcoholic, right? Because it's kind of like the dirty little secret that everybody knew, because he was a highly functional alcoholic at the time. I need you to pour your soul into this character for this character to get off screen. I don't need Paul Newman smiling, charming Paul Newman. I need Paul Newman that is maybe at home, and I need you to bring that out. And you know, when that happens, you can watch it on screen. Like, from the moment the movie opens, it is not a traditional Paul Newman performance where he's getting by on the charm and the blue eyes and the smile, which was all movie star grade, like
Yeah.
weapons grade plutonium.
In fact, do we want to just segue into the reviews on this
Yeah,
because
we can. We can.
Roger Ebert's review, I think, really pegs this. Um, and, it's a like 4 sentence paragraph here. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to read the whole thing.
Oh, we'll just read the whole thing. Go.
Frank Galvin provides Newman with the occasion for one of his great performances. This is the first movie in which Newman has looked a little old, a little tired. There are moments when his face sags and his eyes seem terribly weary, and we can look ahead clearly to the old men he will be playing in 10 years' time. Newman has always been an interesting actor, but sometimes his resiliency, his youthful vitality, have obscured his performances. He has a tendency to always look great, and that is not always what the role calls for. This time, he gives us old, bone tired, hungover, trembling, and heroic Frank Galvin, and we buy it lock, stock, and shot glass.
That's absolutely perfect, and I feel great that I had not read that review and that I came up with the exact same thing. I feel great about that. Do you ever once in a while when you honestly, because you and I are both critique stuff and make,
Mhm.
but when another critic comes out with something where you exactly have the exact same feeling, don't you feel a little bit like,
Yes.
thank God somebody else saw it, damn it.
Yeah.
And you just kind of like you get a little like I'm happy. I'm a little bit happy about that. But you're right. The critical response on this movie, first off, stunning scores on Rotten Tomatoes. Right, we're talking Rotten Tomatoes score right now at this moment, 40 years in on this journey for this movie, 89%, with an audience score over 10,000 ratings of 88%.
Who are the
So
11 to 12% of people who don't like this movie and wouldn't recommend it?
well, I was looking for that because again, sometimes when you're right, the answer sometimes for our show is not necessarily to look at the best reviews of things. Sometimes it's fun for you and I to look at the people who are not on the train and figure
Yeah.
out why they're not on the goddamn train. So one of the reviews was from Variety. There are fine performances and sensitive moral issues contained in the verdict, but somehow this isn't enough to make it a compelling film it should be, which I think is um somebody
That
Molly that
feels
feels
definitely like a matter of taste, I think.
well, it feels like maybe they like courtroom movies and they were somehow disillusioned by, you know, I don't it's not a perfect courtroom movie, so I don't like it's got that's the one of the things about the script that I enjoy thoroughly is that it's jagged. Right? It's not a perfectly contained piece. It uses pieces of like, Paul Newman, it has the James Mason kind of stuff. Like it uses all of its components to make a perfectly formed film, but it's not necessarily the best of a genre. You know what I mean? Like it's not the best courtroom movie you're ever going to see, but it is the best courtroom movie you're ever going to see with Paul Newman. You know what I mean? Like
True. Yeah.
it's weird. But one of the other reviews, like this is a fun one. Molly Haskell, who's a pretty good critic. Well, she's regarded. Um, the
By some
verdict
people.
by some people, the verdict starring
I'll
Paul Newman is stronger on local atmosphere than plot plausibility. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then another one.
I may give her that little point concerning the admittance records that come up at the end of the movie in the trial.
That's fine. Well, there's also like the other stuff that's unplausible in the movie is like almost all trial stuff, but we can get in like the judge stuff is just
Oh yeah, that's
it's
bullshit.
bonkers, but it's bonkers, but it's fun. Because he's playing evil. The judge is evil from the get go. The first meeting he has with Frank Galvin, it does not go well. So one person wrote, and this is somebody reviewing it in Spain. The actors mechanically repeat a script that wasn't written with any originality. I do. It is derivative, but I also don't think it's the idea that the actors are reading the script, because like one of the things that I think comes up when you're thinking about this movie, I
Well,
disagree with that review wholeheartedly. And what I would say is the last monologue, and I was reading up on the monologue because the monologue, I don't know if you know this, but the monologue is actually used in auditions, in college auditions, and in theater auditions to this day
oh, really?
because it's a Mamet,
Yeah.
monologue
Mhm.
that nobody knows about. So it was recently at the 40th anniversary of it. There's like all these backstage the website's called Backstage, but it's all about like talent hires and whatever. And basically, the story about the verdict is this person who is auditioned for hundreds of shows in high school, shows in college, and whatever. He found the verdict Frank Galvin monologue, and the way he read it was totally different from what happens in the movie. Okay, so the monologue occurs near the end of the movie. It's basically it's Paul Newman at his it's maybe his best work on screen. He basically has lost the case. He has to do summation, so he does a whole thing to the jury. It's about 3 to 4 minutes long, and it's just about justice, about poor people getting screwed, about rich people taking advantage of us to the point where we don't even know we're being taken advantage of anymore. And
Mhm.
it's just this wonderful, and it's delivered in a quiet whisper of a voice, but it is a very it's upbeat. Like, let's, some of the lines: the rich win, the poor are powerless, we become tired of hearing people lie, and after a time we become dead, a little dead. We think of ourselves as victims and we become victims. And then he says, I believe there is justice in our hearts, right? So when this person does the monologue on stage, when he at some point in his life, he did the monologue is all punchy with ending with exclamation points as this big rousing American trial speech. And then when he saw the movie, he's like, I was so wrong. I was so wrong in where I put the emphasis and where I put, because that monologue is so good with just Newman talking to the jury and kind of talking to his table and talking to the railing. He doesn't bring his face up to he makes maybe eye contact 3 times.
Mhm.
It is transcendent material that David Mamet has given him. By the way, we didn't talk about during production. The hardest part that Mamet had writing was this particular monologue. It was the hardest piece of writing he had to do in the entire movie. Um, and basically, it's just a wonderful. It's downplayed. It should be triumphant, but it's played as sad. Like the idea that the rich are powerful, we're powerless, and that somehow we're going to get screwed someday, and we die inside a little bit every lie we hear. Which tell me that doesn't have a place 40 years after the fact. Um, and that's one of the great things about the movie. It is at a time it comes out in 1982, right? We're dealing with a Catholic Church that we're not dealing with today,
No.
but it is the Catholic Church we're dealing with today.
And this is where I'm gonna just drop what I had mentioned to you before we started recording tonight, where I said I have the perfect movie that would make a great double feature with this.
Spotlight.
Yep, exactly. Because
Okay.
Spotlight is all about the power and corruption of the Catholic Church in Boston, and while they don't really stress it here, it's all about the power that the underlying current
The
in the verdict
bishop
is the
is
power.
so haughty. He's so goddamn haughty in this movie, where he's just like, "How much do we offer them? We offered him $210,000, Your Excellency. Do you think he'll take it?"
Yeah, it's all about that corruption still, happening, 40 years earlier. And it was, well,
Well,
Spotlight
it's
did
still
keep happening
going
right.
on, still
Yeah.
happening.
Uh,
But it is about that, and I think. But the idea that this monologue could have been read a different way, as more of a sis boom ba kind of way,
mhm.
and the idea that Newman delivers the material in such a way. And is there like other points of interest for you and I? Is there anything better than a flustered James Mason? Is there anything better? There's a bombshell near the end of the movie. It takes a life of its own in the trial, and Mason is just kind of in his nebbish way is just kind of fluttering. Just it's amazing, and it's amazing performance. Miles O'Shea, who's like been the corrupt judge the entire time. There is a 3-minute sequence or 4-minute sequence in this movie where it's not really the dialogue that's being said, but the objects that he's interacting with. So Miles O'Shea is eating breakfast, and then oh, you got an offer. Ooh, and he knows Frank's a drunk, and the James Mason character knows Frank's a drunk. So he comes over and he fills James Mason's. He puts a little booze in James Mason's cup, puts a lot of booze in Paul Newman's cup, and is like, "Can't we come up with a settlement? Come on, this isn't your type of case, Frank." And he's just smarmy and but it's all in the. He's waiting on both people. You know what I mean? And there's a judge, somebody who's super powerful, doesn't wait on people, right? And it's just there are all of those little moments throughout this movie that make it a wonderful court movie, but also an incredible slice of life where it's like dealing with your animal, your demons, dealing with getting a life, getting out of the bottle, getting all of these things. And Newman is so good. He's so and it's just everything that Lumet had him do, saying, "I need you to pour your soul into this role." He really does.
Mm-hmm.
And I was telling you before we started the show as well. So, here's the thing, folks. Every once in a while, we discuss a couple of things before we get in. One of the things I'm looking for now in every Paul Newman movie, and this came from the last Movie Stars documentary, which, by the way, I can't speak highly enough of, because Ethan Hawke gave us all such a wonderful gift to know what these people's lives were like, and also just a glimpse into their lives, and this great marriage that survived Hollywood. It didn't necessarily thrive in Hollywood, just it survived Hollywood and produced these great stars. I'm now looking at every movie for how many times, or the little things that Paul Newman did as an alcoholic in real life that he brought to the screen. And one of the things that they talk about in the documentary is that he always started the day with a sink of cold water and ice cubes. And it's in this movie. It's in, I saw it in Harper. It's in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It's in a lot of places. And the idea behind it is that he was giving you a gift of this is how most alcoholics start their day. Cold water in a sink, trying to get the muscles, trying to get everything back into place from the busted blood vessels and all this other stuff. And the Visine, there's a Visine sequence in the movie where he's constantly putting Visine in his eyes to get the red out. And I just think when he brings those things to the table, it's very hard to hate this performance. It's such a good performance.
It's well observed about a functioning alcoholic in society. It's and those little details that really make you, as Roger Ebert says, kind of push aside that youthful vitality that Newman normally brings, that handsome, rugged, good looks.
Well, the charm in the blue eyes, the smile and the blue eyes are very not present in this movie at all.
Yeah.
There's a weariness to the character. They're like beaten up by life, stuck in the bottle. The only time he's really truly happy is when he's taking a shot and telling a joke at a bar, and maybe hitting or playing pinball.
Going back to that same shot of him playing pinball like 3 or 4 times.
4 times.
Finishes the game, camera pans, follows him over to the bar, and then he walks out.
Well, he walks out, but sometimes he does drunk stuff. Sometimes he cracks an egg into a beer and then drinks the beer. Sometimes sometimes he's late, and then he finally wins the pinball machine. He finally wins, and then he realizes he's late for the court case.
Yeah.
And so even when he wins, he's losing.
To me, I was like, okay, part of my brain says that was probably one day of shooting. Yeah, one setup, the camera and the operator and the
we're gonna get as many of these as you want.
And yes. It was just okay. We do 3 takes on the first shot. You go change your shirt and your jacket, come back, we do it again, and then we do it again, and we do it again. And it probably was maybe even kind of monotonous, but it adds so much
This is
to
where
the
he spends his time, the bar.
yeah, yeah. And that rhythm you talked about earlier and the cadence, that's a visual rhythm. That's a visual cadence. It's a visual, repetition that really, I think, enhances this movie, enhances our understanding of this character so much. And one day a boring shooting, and it brought so much to the movie. And
Just
got to
amazing. There's
that crap.
another scene I do want to talk about. There's a sequence with James Mason where he's prepping a witness, and it's a room full of people. It's a typical like lawyer conference room kind of thing, and they're prepping the doctor witness, and the doctor's a haughty jerk, and he's talking in big words, and James Mason is breaking him of every habit he's ever had of the God complex in this sequence, basically. And it's really interesting because it's the lawyer thinks they're a god and the doctor thinks he's a god, and it turns out that whatever one can puppet the other is, because basically Mason's giving this doctor the opportunity to be able to puppet Frank. If you do all these things this way, he won't have any questions for you, and the jury won't have any questions for you.
Yeah,
And I need you to do them.
They're molding what
They're
they need.
molding him, and he's but he breaks the doctor. And there's this moment of where he breaks the doctor. The doctor finally, you don't know what I go through every day. And everybody in the crowd behind James Mason just laughs. And James Mason leans forward and goes, "Yes, that's exactly what I need." And he goes and he sits back in his seat. And it's just like this. It's a puppet trick. It's a dirty, dirty puppet trick. And you're ensconced in him, and it's just, he's really good. And Jack Warden's really good with the fatherly and the taking care of Frank. And
there's one thing though that I was thinking about while watching this again, and that's the idea of the doctor having, being a god, and doctors can, save lives. And can doctors make mistakes? Sure. Was the mistake made here absolutely egregious? Absolutely. But doctors aren't infallible as much as a lot of times we like to see them portrayed in media that way, and so I understand like where things are just out of the doctor's hands. And and it makes me want, I was kind of thinking about that and how society views doctors and things like that. I'm not sure I got to an actual point in my ruminations, but at least here, it kind of brought that up a little bit. And I was like, no, obviously the doctor was in the wrong here, and the doctor knew he was in the wrong because ultimately he, what he did.
Well, ultimately he does is he covers it up. So he's definitely in the wrong. And also he has a whole sequence where it's revealed that he's had four births in a row, four long labors in a row before he gets to this patient. So he wasn't reading any of the stuff he needed to, and he makes somebody change it. But yeah, no, it's a great rumination. The idea of the God complex with doctors. Another great, like a side note, you're talking about great movies that would be interesting couplings with The Verdict. Malice would be one, because you take the God complex, the Alec Baldwin, Nicole Kidman thriller. Might be a good balance with this as well. Interesting little.
I like that. Yeah, that's
but Spotlight's perfect as well. But I think what I want to see is one of the things about this movie, and in particular Paul Newman. The more I watch Paul Newman, and the more I am exposed to any, like, not that I've never been exposed to Paul Newman stuff before, but the more I watch it now as I get older, he is so good, Rich. In every movie he's in, even the garbage he's in, even the stuff that's kind of junky, he's still the best thing in the junk.
Oh yeah.
Right. And it's just, when you say people go, there are no more movie stars and whatever, one of the problems is you've seen a Paul Newman movie. The people that say that is they've seen a Paul Newman movie. And
that's fair.
You know what I mean? And it's not a bad thing about our today's stars.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not an indictment of today's stars, because I don't think they get the chance to be like Paul Newman. I think we get rare occasions where people get to jump up and become special. You know what I mean? But
Mm-hmm.
this movie is
I
one of the great '80s movies, and it's one of the great '80s performances.
oh yeah.
Although, an interesting response to that is '82. We talked about this with some of our other movies. The '82 Oscar race. He's nominated here for his sixth Oscar, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's lost every other one. He gets to this one, and he loses again because he's up against, and I quote, ready? Peter O'Toole in My Favorite Year. He's up against Jack Lemmon in a movie called Missing. He's up against Dustin Hoffman in Tootsie, which we'll be doing in a few weeks. And he's up against, actually, Tootsie will be ending our year this year, our 2022 generation movie year on December 28th. And so he's up against those three and Ben Kingsley, who wins for Gandhi. So he loses for the sixth time. Really quick, let's do box office, because then we got to talk about legacy a little bit, because that
Okay.
ties in. Actually, we can do legacy first, maybe, because not to jump points. Let's do legacy first, and then we'll talk about the box office, because the box office is kind of astounding. Legacy here is, so he doesn't win here. He doesn't win for this movie. This movie is the gateway to old Paul Newman. This is the gateway to the later stages of Paul Newman's career. This is the first time he's poured himself into a role where he's not getting by on charm and charisma. So he goes on to do other movies that are darker. So he does a little movie called The Color of Money. And he
Mm.
does where he finally wins his Oscar with Martin Scorsese and a sequel to The Hustler. It's pretty damn amazing. He goes on to do Nobody's Fool. He goes on to do Mr. and Mrs. Bridge. He goes on to do Empire Falls and darker material where it's kind of himself coming out on camera. And it's where he's not where he's still the movie star, but he's not in movie star mode. He's in like this Paul Newman uber older mode. It's this weird thing where everybody wanted to work with him, and he just started working with everybody. And when you look at that, it's a real interesting legacy that this is the movie that starts him, and that maybe that Lumet conversation where Lumet says, I don't need you movie star. I need you I need you to be you. I need you to pour yourself into this a little bit. Because when you look at it, like when you get past this movie, he starts doing a bunch of movies that are super, super interesting, and also a little bit darker. Like, listen to the titles. Let's really go through. Color Money, Fat Man and Little Boy,
Yeah.
Blaze, Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, The Hudsucker Proxy, where he's not the star, he's kind of like the side piece.
He
Nobody's
he's
Fool.
fantastic in that movie though, and that's one of my
Oh my
favorite
god,
Coen.
he's so good. He's so good in that movie, and that's a great Coen
You
Brothers
know,
movie.
for kids.
For kids. Nobody's Fool, Twilight, Message in a Bottle, Where the Money Is, Road to Perdition, which is fantastic. And then he gets one of his major roles that we don't really talk about movie wise, but there's a TV production of Our Town where he plays the stage manager, and it becomes one of his signature roles, even though it's not highly pressed up. He does Cars, he does a bunch of other like smaller movies, and it's just really kind of an amazing turn to go from movie star to actor. He's always been both, but
Hmm.
it's a decided shift. Um,
It is very much the linchpin of his career. Uh,
no
the other thing,
franchise
well,
viability, by
no,
the way, no sequels. We don't want to see Frank Galvin again. There's no,
no,
it's he landed the whale.
the
It's
verdict too, more verdicting,
the
you know,
verdict, verdict twice, two
verdict hard.
verdicts.
Uh,
Um,
but he wasn't the only one to get an Academy Award nomination out of this film. Um, all total, there was 5 nominations for this film. including Best Picture, Best Director for Sidney Lumet, James Mason getting a Best Actor for a supporting role, and Best Adapted Screenplay for Manic.
Yeah,
And
it's a
they all
great.
got like Gandhi, but
Well, that's the defining characteristic of 1982, isn't it? It's like, Gandhi's okay, right? I mean, but the defining characteristic is when we get done with this, going through this year, there are so many. For me, I don't know how you feel about it. I'm going to say it in this episode. There are way better movies than Gandhi in this 1982 that we've gone over, and it's not necessarily like, I know most people would look at me and go, "Well, you're talking about E.T. E.T. is one of them, certainly." But I think my favorite year is better than Gandhi. I think Tootsie, when we get there, is better than Gandhi. Tootsie's on my list of like 5 greatest comedies in American film history list. Like, it's high on the list. Tootsie's better. I think this is better.
For a movie about a man who was a pacifist and preached nonviolence, Gandhi was the 800-pound gorilla running amok at the Oscars that year. And you're right, though. I think there were a lot of better films, or at least there should have been better competition between some of those films and some of those categories.
Well, it's like everything rolled over for Gandhi, and it's like, I think the Academy has always been fascinated by large biopics, and Gandhi is just one of the ones where, and it's nothing against Gandhi. I think it's a very good performance and it's a very good movie, but the movies that we're doing on our show, like, we're not going to do Gandhi, right? I don't know, disrespect to Gandhi, but it's just one of those. Maybe we might get to it later in some of our planning next year, but it's not one of the movies where I go, Tootsie and E.T. and this and my favorite year, and things where they were not just good, but they were great, and they maybe got put to the side because Gandhi was a biopic that was a quote unquote important film. And I think, we've done better recently at the Oscars, where we've been able to find a place for films that aren't necessarily popcorn, finding places for popcorn films. But maybe this is one of those years where a movie like The Verdict, the legacy is that it ushers in a whole new era of Paul Newman that is as important as his early stuff. Let's talk about box office really quick, because the box office is kind of interesting on this. So it opens on, actually, we're a week ahead now in life. And it opens on December 8th. It opens wide. And wide in this particular thing, it does open in 3 opening theaters. And it grosses a ton of money early. Opening weekend, it only opens in 3 theaters, and it grosses over $100,000 at 3 theaters. That's pretty good average per screen. It then goes to 904 max theaters. It lasts 12, almost 13 weeks in theaters. It grosses, Rich, get this. So opening weekend is $100,000. It grosses $53 million over the 13 weeks. Now, that's a lot of money, Rich. And we're talking about everything we see right now with movies and box office. And sorry that we changed things up today, but it was kind of the flow of the movie. But basically, everything about box office tells us that early totals are the highest totals you're going to see. This movie only had $100,000 opening weekend. It expands out and it lasts 13 weeks and it grossed $54 million. That's insane. Adjusted in the box office adjusted is $160 million for an R-rated courtroom drama about a drunk against the Catholic Church. That's incredible. That's astounding. That's astounding business, Rich.
It is.
Amazing. I was floored by that it was 100,000 opening weekend. Like the numbers you and I talked about, the domestic share, right? of its opening weekend is like 0.2% of its total gross. 0.2, ridiculous, crazy. It's astounding.
That's what happens when you platform release something.
Well, but it's also again a different time. You know, 900 screens is about as much as you can get for an adult film in the 80s, right?
Mm-hmm.
That isn't a major release. But I think we should go back legacy a little bit. Other legacy pieces that can be talked to as well. Um, this is a place where there are some courtroom drama things that kind of creep in and are used later on in the 80s and 90s. The alcoholic lawyer, the ambulance chaser becomes a character brand, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's referred to as an ambulance chaser. It's not often that you hear that in film and television at that time, because technically, like Matlock is an ambulance chaser too, but we don't talk about that. But I think the other legacy component pieces that you have to look at, um, it's James Mason's last work on screen, and he was,
Mm-hmm.
as you were saying earlier, he's simply one of the best actors we've ever had with regards to being a villain, but also just a good actor, like a really good actor, and whatever you put him in is amazing. We've talked a
Having
little bit about
charming menace.
charming menace is a great way to put it. Like Olivier and the Marathon Man. But also, this is also a place where Mamet starts, right? I mean, the legacy of this movie has got to be Mamet sitting in front of a typewriter, writing that last monologue out for Frank Galvin in front of the jury. And it's just a beautiful piece of writing about, and it's going to be characters that Mamet revisits in American Buffalo and Glengarry Glen Ross, little people that are crushed by the system,
Mm-hmm.
right? Little people that are smashed and their dreams have been kind of crushed. And so that legacy is thriving in this movie. So if you're a Mamet fan, if you come out of Glengarry Glen Ross and go, always be closing, and you're constantly quoting Mamet, I would argue that the verdict monologue by Frank to the jury is one of the greater Mamet monologues on film, anyway.
And you need to
But
check this out.
you need to check it out because it's really good, and also Mamet is really good when you have great actors doing Mamet, right? When you have an actor of the caliber of Paul Newman doing Mamet, pretty amazing, right?
Oh yeah.
It kind of jumps up. Other franchise and legacy stuff. Um, Again, this is kind of whether you want to call it a genre piece or whatever. Newman willing to put himself forward and also willing to revisit characters and go back and kind of look at himself in the bottle. This leads to The Color of Money. This movie directly leads to The Color of Money, and the idea that Scorsese said, I love The Hustler. I'd like to revisit him. What's Fast Eddie Felson up to right now? And then Newman, yes, let's do it. The Color of Money, I've recently, again during my whole Paul Newman rabbit hole, Color of Money is so good, and in ways, it's on par or better than The Hustler, which
Mm-hmm.
The Hustler's really good though. Like I don't want to disrespect The Hustler. But that's another thing that we encourage on our show. If you find a rabbit hole, by all means go down the rabbit hole.
Oh God, yeah.
The Paul Newman rabbit hole is fascinating. And even if you wanted to do legacy stuff, when you have a director of the caliber of Sidney Lumet, right, where you're looking at Lumet, and Lumet, he's already established himself as one of the great directors, and he's coming in here, and it's just like more business, right? He's coming in, and this is also a kind of a jump into Lumet's kind of the end of his career as well.
Mm-hmm.
Where he's doing, he has a bunch of other movies. That finally, the last Lumet movie that he directed was in 2007.
Before the
Before the
Devil
Devil.
Knows You're Dead,
Yes,
which is
which is
fantastic.
it's a great movie. It's very
If,
dark.
if yeah, if you're
Um,
gonna end your career on a high note, that's a
yeah,
pretty high note.
that's a pretty high note to go out on.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a good, like, he's working with um a lot of these movies that he did after this movie. Power and The Morning After and Running on Empty, which is a really great movie. Um, and then he kind of goes back to the courtroom movies a lot. Night Falls on Manhattan, Guilty of Sin, a couple other things where Find Me Guilty. So he goes back and he tries to find these courtroom dramas that he's doing, but I don't know that it gets better than this particular movie for him, with this particular actor and this particular group of actors and this script by Mamet that's crackling and just it's sizzling with life. And
Mm-hmm.
the last legacy I would also say is what we know now versus what we knew in 1982, where you're looking at the Catholic Church, and you're in the 80s we had a lot of movies where the Catholic Church is mentioned or talked about, or and it's kind of a controversial subject. When this movie came out, it was very controversial, right? That the Catholic Church was buying off people in a movie and all this other stuff. But this movie's ahead of its time. The legacy has to be that it knew things and wanted to talk about things before anybody else wanted to talk about them.
Mm-hmm.
And that sometimes is an amazing legacy to have, to be first on something, as that we just had a Best Picture winner, Spotlight, where it all came out in the wash, and it's particularly about the Boston Diocese, and this movie's a very distinctly Boston as well. It's great to be there. And sometimes places take on a life of their own, sometimes places and people and things take on a life of their own, Rich. And with that, next week, Rich, we do a little movie that's very lovingly. Uh, it's an important movie if you're from the city of Scranton.
Yes.
It's a movie called That Championship Season. Bruce
And
Dern,
as
Stacey Keach, Robert Mitchum, Martin Sheen, Paul Sorvino. Directed by Scranton's own Jason Miller. Written and directed by Scranton's own Jason Miller.
And if you're as much as The Verdict is a Boston movie, or Boston is definitely a character in this movie, this is very much
a Scranton movie. And here's the thing, Scranton is very well known for The Office. This is an entirely different but very real take on the city of Scranton, how things play out in the city of Scranton. Rich and I are both from the area, so it's a movie that's growing up and living around Scranton, Pennsylvania, is one of the most interesting things you can put on a resume application. It's just it's an interesting town to be from. It's an interesting town that's portrayed in films and television. It's either a joke or it's deadly serious. And in this particular case, this movie's about a group of friends that lived their best lives in high school. So a little bit in going with The Verdict, their lives aren't stuck in a bottle necessarily, although some of them are. Their lives are stuck holding that championship trophy up with a championship season that was bigger than any of them, and even throughout the movie and towards the end of the movie is still bigger than they are. So next week, That Championship Season, for all our Scranton folks out there. Rich, where can people find you?
Okay. All of my writing is, of course, at filmbuffonline.com. I've got another podcast that I do with my great co-host, Natasha Bogutsky, called The Big Picture Podcast. New episode, which we recorded yesterday, and so it should be available by the time you're watching this, is we talk a little bit about the passing of the great Irene Cara and kind of position her Oscar win there in 1982, like right between. She was 40 years after Hattie McDaniel won an Oscar for Gone with the Wind. making her only the second African American artist to win, you know, an Academy Award. And so we kind of like, and now we're 40 years after that. And, you know, so we kind of talk a little bit about how that kind of plays out, where she is in that continuum. And
It's
then,
it's a it's a dark continuum. It's just ridiculous. It's crazy. Because think
I
about
wish
it.
I wish it was better, but it's
Yeah, we're getting there. We're working on it.
yeah.
Work in
And
progress.
we also do 2 reviews this week. We spend some time talking about Wednesday, the fantastic Addams Family series that's on Netflix that just dropped. 8 episodes. It's just utterly amazing. We love it. And then we do a little bit of a retro review, taking a look at on the 75th anniversary of its release, Miracle on 34th Street. And
A great
and
movie. A
and
truly great movie.
I talked for a good couple of minutes about one of my favorite unsung um, character actors, Thelma Ritter, because this is like the movie that gave her first big break. You can also find Film Buff online on Facebook, where we'll throw up some other new little bits of news, or sometimes historical things on our Facebook page.
Yeah.
And I can be found on Twitter at Film Buff Rich.
Right. And until the Armageddon, until the Twittergeddon, and then we're
Yeah,
going to be
till
going
Twitter
somewhere
done,
else,
then I have no
Mastodon
idea
or something
where I'm
else.
going.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mastodon seems like a lot of work. Okay, you can find me on Twitter and Facebook, JW the Movie Guy. You can also find we do a wonderful podcast on Wednesday nights before this show called Loud and Nerdy. We have a Loud and Nerdy page, and we also have a Loud and Nerdy group. Group is really fun. A lot of 800 like-minded individuals who just like asking tough questions like, who would you rather, what boss would you rather have in a TV or movie? Things like that. We do all kinds of polls like that and wacky stuff.
Mm.
You know, pick your most favorite Schwarzenegger film to survive a list of 6, things like that. You know, important stuff. You can find me there. We're doing all kinds of cool things. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. Like we said, we cannot respond to anything tonight, but if you put up comments and talk a little bit, we will try to get to response to the responses as best we can
Yes.
put it. But thank you for joining us this week. Well, next week, that championship season, Jason Miller's pretty important ode to Scranton. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see everybody next week.
Have
Stay
a great
safe.
night.
See a movie.